everyone. It's me, Peppermint, and I'm glad that y'all are here. I'm running. Ooh, that's a close up. I'm running tech today, but I am super stoked that you all are joining. We have a special little pep talks moment today because we have. Listen, there's been a lot going on, and some people have been talking about how they are scared. We might have heard some people talking about how they want to leave the country. We might have been hearing people talking about seeing different headlines that, are alarming, all types of things I've heard and seen. And it can probably be confusing to a lot of people because a lot of the things, a lot of the headlines that we've seen have sort of been nested in sort of like a legal argument. There's like lots of legality connected to like what we've been seeing going on, whether it's having to do with students and immigration or protests or documented immigrants or, authoritarianism and of executive orders and just like all kinds of stuff, jets being gifted. A lot of I feel like I've thought more about the law during this presidency and this current administration's last time in office than I ever have in my life. And maybe that's a good thing. I'm learning free education. Anyway, sometimes it feels like you just need a law degree just to be able to read what is going on in the headlines or to understand it and parse it all out. Luckily, you don't need that today because we have a very special guest. I'm super excited to welcome, I think this is the first time we've ever actually shared a live stage together, like a digital sort of thing together, I think. Lambda legal attorney to the stars. I'm adding to the stars because, I'm a star. Carl Charles is joining me on the stream. Hi, Carl.
Hi, Peppermint. Thank you so much for having me today.
I'm so excited that you were able to join us in your busy, busy schedule. I'm so thirsty. I should have gotten water. So I'm going to savor these last few drops. Where are you streaming from today?
I'm in Atlanta, Georgia.
El Hotlanta. Does
That's
anybody
right.
say that down there?
Not
No,
I understand we're not supposed to say that anymore.
not
So
supposed to. It's not good. It's not good to do. Yeah, I'm bad girl. Um, and so now to those people who don't know you, I'm sorry. I should have asked you for a more illustrious um, bio. Like I should have like done a little bit more research and pumped you up a little bit. But could you help me out? Like,
yeah, of course.
yeah.
Um, yeah, so my name's Carl Charles. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a senior attorney with Lambda Legal. That's LAM, B as in boy, D as in dog, A as in apple, Lambda Legal. We're the nation's oldest and largest legal advocacy group advocating solely for the rights of LGBTQ plus people and everyone living with HIV or AIDS. We've been around for 50 years, and I'm based out of our Atlanta, Georgia office.
Wow. Uh, Now that is on the tails of I don't know what was it, Idaho or Iowa saying that they're going to have like basically a straight heritage month or something, family values, heritage, pride, straight pride, and whatever. It does beg the question. I mean, we've heard a few, but enough people saying, "Oh, like the gays, they have what they need. Like it's 2025, everything's fine." And certainly, like a few years ago, and definitely in the wake of marriage equality, between marriage equality and some of the things we were going to try to strive for in the trans community, I would have agreed that progress has been made, and we have made progress. And it to a lot of people, they might feel like, oh, you can rest on your laurels, like we've achieved what we need to achieve. The work is done, but we're seeing now. Even though we all the work wasn't done anyway, that we are certainly the country is changing, and the country as related to the laws and policies and even opinions uh, that about the LGBTQ community are, and those with AIDS and HIV, are changing. We can at least probably all agree on that. I would say they're sliding back. There are certainly things that are definitely rolling back, like literally being rolled back.
Yeah.
And so, were you prepared for this moment, or as an attorney, an advocacy attorney, were you kind of, are you always in this mode? Are we just seeing what you already knew?
I mean, look, I think this even shocked. I think the scope and the scale and the speed surprised a lot of us, right? I think that
Hmm.
even those of us who knew it was going to be quite bad, and you referenced this in your opening remarks, right? Like during the first Trump administration, frankly, they were not well organized, and they were kind of sloppy, and that was to our advantage, right? That benefited us, frankly, because they did not really show up ready to go. And I don't have to tell you or your viewers this. They showed up this time ready to go, and they jumped out of the gate, and they have flooded the space just with what has felt like a relentless amount of attacks on so many communities that are at a disadvantage in fighting back. And so I think we were a little bit surprised at how quickly various issues were taken on. Right, I think we thought, well, they'll roll these things out over the next 6 months. That is not what happened. We had 5 executive orders in like less than a week, and almost every single one of them targeted trans people in really pernicious ways. And so we have had to be very quick and nimble, and all of us in the LGBTQ plus legal advocacy community have just been working our tails off since January. I said to someone yesterday, I can't believe it's been 4 months, only 4 months since this administration basically bulldozed its way across the country and through, or is trying to bulldoze through so many of the rights and the various ways that we have made progress over the last 10 years. I mean, I'm just thinking about when you and I met in 2015, like a full 10 years ago. It really did feel like we were on a precipice of progress, right? It was
Hmm.
the end of the second Obama administration. Things weren't perfect. I'm not saying everything was perfect, but we had made some real strides. There were, of course, like the trans tipping point on Time Magazine with Laverne Cox. That was around that time. The business community and the trans community fought back HB2 in North Carolina. That was the awful bathroom ban, and it really felt like we were on the upswing. And it feels like since then we have just been fighting a wave of backlash, right? Fighting
Hmm.
the pendulum swing, and that has really culminated in what we're seeing in the last 4 months.
And for people who, I mean, now it feels so gaslighty, and it does feel like so much. It feels like, I went and saw the movie based on the sort of biopic starring, I think, Sebastian Stan, based on the current president, the current, uh, why is his name
Resident of the White
crazy?
House.
Yeah, the resident of the White House. Yeah. And I watched the movie and I thought it was good. It was about his relationship, everything obviously before his presidency, as a real estate profession, as a human being that was alive in New York, and it's bit of his personal life, first marriage and things like that, uh,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and his relationship with Roy Cohn,
Oh,
and I guess the attitudes that Roy, as a very sharp and probably not well liked human being himself,
yeah.
instilled in this human being who currently serves as president, and the sort of deny and deny everything, never admit that you're wrong, deflect, all of these things, which is kind of like eerily like the motto of like, the health insurance industry. um, and never admitting defeat, never admitting that you're wrong, never apologizing. That seems to, apparently that's what he was taught and learned from Roy Cohn, and that definitely lines up with how he seems to have led led his presidency and his public life, rather, his life publicly.
Yeah.
And that, on top of the sort of constant, what feels like gaslighting
Yeah.
by the people who are proponents of and supporters of this presidency and administration, it it it's no wonder that they've moved so quickly, because we kind of gave, we meaning people who weren't necessarily very enthusiastic supporters of this administration, this upcoming administration, were trying to ring the alarm bells and utilize
Yes.
or at least acknowledge the existence of Project 2025 as a
Right.
starting point for conversation between the two sides.
Right.
And then people were like, "Oh, he doesn't know about that. I don't know about that." Yeah, yeah. But it's literally the playbook, and it's exactly what they're following. So it's no surprise that they're moving so quickly, because they already had it plotted and planned out for 40 years.
Yes. Yes. It really um, it
I don't know if
it
there's anything to say about.
no, I mean it's just it's really disappointing, because you would think that for so many people to see the thing before the thing happens would be enough to change their mind, right? Just to
Mm-hmm.
look at the thing and see these are the bad things that they say they're going to do, um, would be enough. But to your point, all it took was him sort of denying any knowledge of the existence of that thing, and people sort of fooling themselves into believing him, and here we are, right? And I think that that strategy has regrettably served him very well, and I'm sad that any part of Roy Cohn's legacy has lived on so long after his passing.
Yeah, it seems like he is in the White House as well. Uh, which is like,
Its
not
own
good.
kind of twisted.
Yeah, it is, as someone who was gay. Was he like openly gay? I don't understand what was, you know, I
It was
don't
like
know if
an
he,
open secret, is my
yeah,
sense of the, from what I've read. Yeah.
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 Uh, Now, so I want to, ask about a couple of things. One of the biggest things that I guess it was my poor education. I don't know if it's my how poorly I did in school, or if it's that the school was not so good, or a combination of both. But I don't know that I paid attention in history class, but even if I did, I think I'd be hard pressed if I could jump back into a time machine and find a day where they actually taught us about the dangers and the warnings of fascism. And I think that is a huge disservice, because based on everything that I've done in trying to play catch up with and learn about what fascism is, it
Yeah.
seems like that is what is going on right now, and it never really left. I mean, between that and the hierarchical like caste system that exists, that we don't really acknowledge in our country, like just outwardly and socially, it seems like that is what is going on. And when you have, and it's, I believe that when we have these systems, a fascist sort of way of life happening, that the types of oppression that we're seeing, the types of utilizing the law and the state, and the partnership between the state and the sort of corporations, capitalist entities, coming down on and oppressing people below on the bottom, that's no surprise. That's exactly what fascism does. And
Yeah.
so, from what I've learned. And
Yeah.
so when people talk about and refer to, I know the response when people were referring to this upcoming presidency as a fascist regime coming in, getting ready to come into power, as a warning to not vote or to vote against this administration. I remember the response was, "Oh, you're just and so fascism, schmashism." But now we're like in something. Is this fascism based on what you have seen, or
It,
if you're comfortable?
yeah, no. So I, like you, I don't recall a time in my education, and I don't, you know, we haven't talked about our background, so I can't say if mine was better or worse than yours. But I was educated in private Christian schools, and
Ooh,
there was no discussion.
sounds
There was
hot.
a light coverage of the Nazis in Germany, at
Mm-hmm.
the outset of World War One and leading into two. But I have done a crash course in the last. I'm looking at my calendar, like 6 days. I'm listening to Rachel Maddow's book Prequel, which
Okay.
does exactly lay out the history of fascism in our United States, like, and how,
Mm.
basically tracking from the early 1900s up
Mm-hmm.
and through World War II, and the sheer number of people who were, frankly, terrifyingly in support of what
Mm-hmm.
Hitler and the regime were doing in Germany, and in fact were bringing that fascism and authoritarianism right here to the United States in so many ways, right? Trying to malign all kinds of people, Jews, communists, black people, of course, gay people, queer people. And so, you know, there, I have had to wrestle with what I understand in my own life to be a fair amount of, like, the US is great and never does anything wrong, that is just pumped at us, just
All the
like
time. Except
everywhere,
you,
right?
United American exceptionalism.
Right. That's exactly what I said to my husband. I said, I am unlearning so much American exceptionalism right now, and
Mm-hmm.
realizing that the roots of what is happening now, we never pulled out,
We never
right? And
did.
I think that's perhaps why, and this is just me musing, this is my own, sort of personal um, thoughts here, but I'm wondering if that's why what we're seeing now has taken root so easily, right? If it weren't
Yes.
for the fact that this was under the surface and never rooted out in the ways that we know these things have to be, right? You know, and Germany's having their own problems now, but I will
Mm-hmm.
say that for many years following World War II, they took a very proactive effect at addressing, acknowledging, naming, teaching, and unlearning, right? And
Mm-hmm.
we just have not done that. I was just listening today to a story on NPR about the Tulsa race massacre. And my
Mm-hmm.
sister lives in Tulsa, and she's a public school teacher there, and she lives in the neighborhood, the Greenwood neighborhood, right? That was
Mm-hmm.
decimated, right? Black Wall Street was completely destroyed, and no one, until recently, no one talks about it, no one teaches about it, no one addresses it.
It's not in nary this. I mean, the Tulsa massacre and the decimation of Black Wall Street, which I think many of us, it sort of bubbled up again during 2020
Yes,
for obvious reasons. I think first, most notably for me, surprisingly and shockingly and sort of ashamedly, during the television show with Regina King. Uh,
The Watchmen.
the Watchmen. Yeah. And like this is like the new version of The Watchmen.
Yes,
And I remember seeing the first movie and nothing about that was in there then. And so, this is really this is my first time being able to grasp all that. And I feel like it's all of our history, but this is definitely in my history as well. And but that's not the only instance of this happening, like these massacres of people in our country, but like it's since in line with Tulsa, black folks in America, their neighborhoods, their towns being like completely destroyed, bombed,
bombed.
you know, it's
Philadelphia.
happened
Yeah,
a lot. Philadelphia, move.
yeah,
I'm from near that area and I remember Ramona, Africa as a survivor. And so you're right, like these atrocities, we in the United States did not do a good job of naming being honest about our history. I guess
being
that's
honest.
the best way to put it.
Yep. That's right. That's
which
right.
allows
And
these things to sort of repeat.
precisely.
The for those of you, for those watching, definitely, read up on the Tulsa massacre, read up on Move On and Philadelphia. Not Move On. Um yeah, Move On. Um
Yeah. I'm trying to think of the name, which group they were affiliated with exactly, but I was just watching a clip about it this weekend that like 3 square city blocks in Philadelphia were bombed.
completely, and
Yeah.
obviously innocent people, but like people unaffiliated with the
Right.
group.
Right.
um but even that's like, this is like bombing a neighborhood. But in addition to that, like, there's like, even what was done with, like, the Black Panthers, and like burning down the, like, busting in and shooting up people, and burning, like the breakfast program that they had, like, for free breakfast, and they're gonna like pee on the breakfast by the FBI, like busting it up, destroying the food, urinating on it, defecating on it, and then burning it down. You know, that is a threat to this type of control, like by the state, obviously.
Right.
And it's really interesting. A lot of these groups had been at the time named as a terrorist group or a threat to safety. But if we look deeper, what they were doing is trying to build community, and sort of like building off of the mutual aid, the concept of mutual aid. And that is the biggest threat to a government that uses, we're going to cut your funding if you don't get rid of the Black folks and the LGBT people folks and the Jewish people. And if you don't get rid of DEI, we're going to cut your federal funding. Goodbye Sesame Street. We're going to they just announced today that they're going to move to Netflix because PBS is obviously in trouble. For what? PBS is in trouble because they have like diverse casting.
Right.
They're cutting the funding and we're losing PBS. They're cutting the funding and we're losing all these different things. That's like, that is authoritarianism.
Yeah.
Um, and if we're gonna cut funding to AIDS and HIV programs that provide PrEP and education and
Yes.
medication, like all of these things they're threatening the people who provide these services, but they're using like the sort of the threat of lack of money, and that means a lot to these
Yeah.
programs that depend on
Right.
these services. So fascism and authoritarianism is, it looks like it's swirling around. What do you That is a scary thing to hear, especially for people like me, and for maybe listeners who don't feel prepared and don't feel educated about these things. It was just Move, was the organization.
Oh, nice.
Um, and so for people who are LGBTQ, okay, obviously we're seeing a huge pushback. We're seeing the trans community demonized and talked about in really negative ways. And we're starting to see that seep into legislation, sports bans, obviously book bans. It started, maybe, can't say it started, but like a few years ago, this
Mhm.
wave was like the reintroduction of the trans, talking point in our country seemed to start with the drag bans a
Mhm.
few years
Mhm.
ago. Like that was an introduction to sort of like gender expansive conversation and
Mhm.
ways to talk about gender. Drag book readings,
Mhm.
banning those things, the drag bans, and then moving through with locker room and sports, and now
Mhm.
moving through with gender affirming care and the
Right.
military.
Right.
And so, and then starting with the youth, and now, oh, suddenly it's like everybody under 18. Oh, now it's 19. It's just the age is going to creep up. Uh, and now Texas is like, obviously the canary in the coal mine with like basically saying we want to just make it being trans felony. So, what in a country that the systems, the three systems, the three branches of government who used to work a little bit, did not work maybe always harmoniously together, but like used to work somewhat together
Yep.
predictably.
Yep.
It seems as though the last bastion right now is, especially with money in politics, is the judicial branch,
Yes.
which doesn't seem that strong right now,
We're
from my perspective. But from your
yeah.
perspective,
Yeah. Look, yeah, I think that's fair, and I think the reason you and many others feel that way, and you're not wrong, is because the pressure being put on the judiciary by a basically absent Congress, right? Congress is out to lunch. They're just not. We're
perpetually.
like there's a few things happening, and not many of them are good. And an executive that is really putting the A in authoritarianism, right, and trying to take over all of the things that it possibly can, whether or not they are permitted to do so by the that little document called the Constitution. The all of this withdrawal of funding, that's supposed to be a congressional. The purse strings belong to Congress, right? And the problem is you now have a Congress that is in cahoots with an out of control executive. And so all of these politicians that say they believe in uh, the United States and our way of democracy and blah blah blah,
Hmm.
that's all lies, right? That's all made up make believe. But the judiciary is basically doing all of the work of the resistance right now, right? And that is tough because the judiciary is not equipped with law enforcement, right? They're not the enforcement a branch that is supposed to be the executive, but we now have a DOJ that is completely removed from any objectivity and is basically trying to turn itself into the police force of the presidential administration, right, of the president. And so
Hmm.
the judiciary is doing an outsized amount of work, right? And I will say there are good things happening from the judiciary, especially as it
Hmm.
relates to trans people, LGBT people. We are seeing some good things come from the courts, but we need those things to hold, and so we're getting good decisions from district courts. We're getting some good decisions from the courts above them, the courts of appeals. But then, as many people know, some of these things are going up to the Supreme Court, and that's where we're all sort of holding our breath, right, and waiting to see how things turn out. Some of your audience may be familiar with the trans military ban case that Lambda Legal brought. We got a nationwide injunction, which means the ban was not in effect, and then the government basically appealed that injunction, right? Sought a stay of that injunction from the Supreme Court off the shadow docket, and the Supreme Court has now stayed that injunction such that service members, are in the process of being removed, separated from the military, right? And look,
On the
I'm
basis of,
of the Trump administration's executive order prioritizing military excellence and readiness, restoring America's fighting force. Those
using
executive
the
orders.
excuse of like I heard, I mean, I heard, and I heard word on the street is that they were using like the, like the DSM-5, like, mental, I don't know, like classification of like transness as a mental disorder or something, as a reason. That's what I observed in a video talking about this by
Yeah.
a creator, so who may or may who's not an attorney and wasn't there. Uh, but I was just trying to figure out like is it just like, oh, you're trans, we don't want it, or like what's the impact of trans? What are they saying the impact of trans people in the military is
Well, so
that
there's
is negative?
there's two things. So the first is this executive order essentially says that trans people inherently, just because of their status as trans, are not adhering to the requirements of it's like truthfulness, honesty, blah blah blah. It's basically weaponizing that old, tired, inaccurate stereotype that trans people, we are not
Perpetrators.
who we say we are, and we're
Mm-hmm.
not, that we're, whatever, that we're not being truthful. And so the executive order has weaponized that, right? And I think in some of the most disgusting, but also the most obvious language, said, here's why trans people can't be in the military, because the military stands for honesty and dignity and all these things that trans people are not, right? And so that the judge that struck this down pointed exactly to that language and said, you can't get language that's more dripping with animus, right? Dripping with hatred. That is it. And then the way they are functionally, the second thing that they are functionally doing to separate people, I think, is they're using that language, but they're also saying that gender dysphoria is a medical condition, which it is, right? And that's no shade, no
Oh
stigma.
yeah, yeah. I'm not rolling my eyes at the fact that
Yeah,
it is.
yeah, but they're saying that's a disqualifying medical condition, right? In the same way that for decades they said that being HIV positive was a disqualifying medical
Disqualifying.
condition, even though
Understood.
that has no relation whatsoever to
To
anyone's
what you have to
readiness.
do in the military.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to anyone's readiness to deploy or to do their job here on an Air Force, Army, Navy base, right? Like, there's no correlation, obviously, between being LGB, between being HIV positive, between being trans, and being able to do your job. Period. Full stop. Anywhere in the military or anywhere else, there's no connection there. But that's what they're that's the basis upon which they are separating people, right? They're using the executive order as the grounds, and then they're
Mhm.
saying this is a disqualifying medical condition.
In these types of situations, are there is it's really frustrating to see that there is sort of publicly an erosion of confidence in experts at the sort of like just regular everyday public level. Does that also carry or bleed into like the into these you know courtrooms? Because who are they? Says who?
Yeah, yeah. No, it's that's such a great point. And look, we have marshaled the people with the most experience, right? The experts, and by that I mean the scientists, the medical professionals, the experts in military readiness, right? There are nerds like that in the world, right? And I mean nerd very respectfully. Like, there are people
I don't. Just kidding.
whose job it is to research and study these kinds of things, and we are bringing all of that expertise to bear in all of these cases, right? Whether it's a case about gender affirming healthcare for youth or adults, whether it's about school curriculum, whether it's about access to restrooms and locker rooms, or it's about people's ability to be in the workplace, to do their jobs in the military, etc. And those experts are credible, right? But the the our opponents are bringing their own, you know, allegedly credible experts, which more and more it is a dwindling group, but it is incredibly lucrative, right? And I can share a couple of links for some
Yeah, send it. You might
articles.
actually be able to put it into the chat here, and I can open them up. I'm not sure if you're able to see the chat that's here on this website.
Oh, great. I mean, there's a couple of articles done by I think Mother Jones did one. Um,
Mhm.
but in any case, there's sort of a revolving door of these folks who show up in the cases over and over again, say the same tired things, have very minimal, if any, experience treating trans people, studying trans people. I'm sure they don't actually know any trans people in their real life, other than maybe
Mhm.
a couple of them who have had trans patients. Um, but a lot of these folks are now behind the studies that are being pushed as the basis for, as the justification for all of this for all of these things, right? Whether it's legislation, whether it's the executive orders, whether it's the justifications they're using in court, these folks are showing up and sorry, I'm trying to get to
No
the
problem.
chat and
And
things
on the
like
right hand side, there's a private chat. It's in the middle. It has like a little person's head in it.
that's where I need to be. Okay.
Got it.
So it's groups who are huge opponents of the push for LGBTQ equality and rights in this country. Groups like the Heritage Foundation, the Alliance Defending Freedom. I understand. I haven't seen it yet, but I understand. Last week tonight, John Oliver just did a segment covering the Alliance Defending Freedom, and these so-called experts are just people with opinions, right? They are generally not qualified to make these assessments and are doing so with a patently clear anti-trans agenda. And so, we are having to fight back against that in the courtroom, which we're able to do fairly well. I will say that. But the problem is that these views don't just show up in the courtroom, right? This shows up in legislation in states across the country, right? The website that I take a look at pretty much every week, translegislation.com, is tracking all of the bills in states across the country that could have an impact on trans people. And there's a lot of I'm dropping it to you now in the
Okay, thank you.
the chat, Peppermint. There you can click on each state and see the bills pending in that state. There's a master list of all of the bills. There's a number of really informative graphics. One in particular I'm looking at here that shows just what you were talking about, Peppermint. In 2021, there were only, I say only, but compared to now, that's not that many, there were only 143 bills targeting trans people, and only 18 of them passed in 2021. And now we're at 895 pending in the states, and 100 of those bills have passed, right? And they're focused on the things you talked about at the beginning of our conversation, right? A lot of bills targeting education. And it's no wonder, right? It's no wonder they're focused on that for the very reason that you and I were just chatting about earlier. If you can keep important information from people for a long time, they have to then, as adults, go out and seek that information on their own once they're out in the world and they're busy with the business of life and survival. If you can prevent young people from learning about LGBTQ people, Black people, Indigenous people, the history of the United States, all of these important things, you can really achieve a lot of the things you set out to do in terms of the political landscape. And so a lot of these bills are focused on curriculum. Many of them are focused on sports, as you talked about. A lot of them are targeting bathrooms and restrooms. And we're seeing, other ones focused on adult performance, right? Of course, drag shows. A lot of them looking at religious exemptions. So trying to exempt religious affiliated organizations and businesses from anti-discrimination laws. That's a really significant one that I encourage folks to take a look at. And those are all happening on the state and local level. So this is a really helpful website for people to take a look at if you want to be informed about what is happening on a national scale. And also you can zero in on your state, right? You can take a look at what's happening in your state, bills that have been proposed, and track them as they move through your state legislature and figure out when your state legislative session ends. So that's one resource I want to mention for folks. But it's really not just what we're seeing happen at the federal level, but it's across the states as well. And that's where these opinions from these so-called experts show up, right? They're showing up to justify this legislation at the state level, not only to justify what we're seeing happen coming out of the federal government.
And so, speaking of like the different areas, one of the two areas that are sort of like the most shocking to me, and I never thought that I'd ever even consider, you know, like a time when I wouldn't want to live in the United States, or a time that I thought that living in this country just in general would be something that was like extremely uncomfortable for me, or something that I was considering no longer doing. But I was forced to kind of sit and sort of contemplate, okay, how much is too much for me,
Where's
you
your line?
know?
Yeah.
And for me, I figured out that my line is at the loss of healthcare and the loss of an ID, that an accurate identification, accurate documentation, IDs, things like that, that really reflect who I am.
Yeah.
And, you know, I, so the passport and the loss of gender affirming care, the potential loss of gender affirming care, the attacks on gender affirming care are things that I'm watching very, very closely, because those are the two things that I've really invested so much of my time in when it came to my medical transition and even my social transition. Obviously, those are like two major things for a lot of people, should they choose to do it. And they are definitely like not easy, expensive, time consuming. I invested a lot of motherfucking time into this, and I should not be having them. And I paid a lot of money. So, like, to reverse them, I'm like, no, 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 no.
Yeah.
But I'm looking at Lambda Legal's, the case that, or the instance of the passports, that was really shocking to me. I know that Lambda Legal filed a lawsuit on behalf of 7 trans U.S. citizens. Now, school me and forgive me if I'm wrong. Was this in partnership with ACLU? Is this the same, or is this a different passport lawsuit?
Yeah, so different. And let me say,
Oh,
ACLU got out of the gate really quickly in February, and I'm so glad that they did. We're so glad that they did, and they filed a lawsuit on February 7th, and it's a class action lawsuit. And so the benefit of the class action is, if their district court judge says, yes, I agree with you, you can represent the class of people impacted by this, then the good news is the good outcomes from the ACLU's lawsuit stand to impact all of the people in that class, right? That will include Miss Peppermint, potentially you, right? If you have a passport renewal coming up soon, that will impact anybody who needs a passport and needs a correct sex marker on that document, right? And so folks should keep an eye out. The case is called Orr v. Trump, and they are having an oral argument on their motion to certify their class at the end of May. So that's coming up right after Memorial Day. Unfortunately,
wow.
I don't think you can stream it or listen to it, but the judge, she's been issuing orders fairly quickly. So folks are optimistic that they will get an order on that motion soon. And they also, earlier in, this must have happened, I want to say in April, they got a preliminary injunction, but only for 6 of their clients, right? It's a little, I know I'm getting into legalese here, but basically what they do is they have clients who represent the classes, right? And the classes of people are trans people who need an M or an F, and trans people who need an X. And so they have class representatives. Those 6 people, I think, the court said those 6 people have to get correct passports now, and we'll come back and settle the matter as to whether the ACLU can represent the whole class. Now, the case we filed that you asked about, thank you for asking about it, is Schlachter versus U.S. Department of State. And we filed on behalf of just 7 people. We did not file a class action. We filed on behalf of 7 trans people, one of whom is non-binary and needs an X marker on their passport. And we filed that in the district court in Maryland, right? And so we represent just those 7 people, and we'll go forward representing their interests alongside the ACLU's case, which is looking for relief for everyone impacted by the passport policy. And so the benefit here, really to have multiple federal courts tell this administration, you can't do this. This is unconstitutional.
Mm-hmm.
This violates the APA. This violates the Constitution in X, Y, Z ways. And that really is, going back to the judiciary. We want as many bites at that apple as we can get to say, you can't do this. Like you cannot do this. And so, there's lots of there is a good basis to be hopeful about the outcome of Orr versus Trump, and for our case, Schlachter versus U.S. Department of State. A lot of people incredibly committed and working very, very hard on just that issue, which, as you said, is so incredibly important to so many trans people, including me. You outlined my line in the sand. If I can't get
Mm-hmm.
access to healthcare or to identity documents, that makes my life, that makes so many trans people's lives not work. Period. You need your medication and you need to be able to move through the world as the person you are, period, full stop. And so I'm glad you laid that out there. I think you're not alone in that assessment of where things are at, and we are all watching it very closely. And in particular, and I know you've talked about this before, we're watching very closely the outcome of the Scrimetti case, which is coming. God, it is
In
almost the
June?
end of May, but it's coming in June. I think we're likely to get it at the very end of June. If not, maybe they might take us into the beginning of July. But thank God
We
Chase
tried.
argued that case, and
Yeah.
I know you were there in December, emceeing that event outside the Supreme Court, which was so that day was so cold. Oh my God,
I'm like
uh, it
freezing.
was so cold. It was so cold, but I know you did too. I felt the warmth of all of the trans folks there, all of the allies,
100%.
all of the family and friends and people who love and care about trans people showed up, and that was so incredible. I got to be in the courtroom. I had to wait starting at 2:30 in the morning to get into the courtroom, but it was worth the frozen toes to get to hear Chase and to see him standing at that podium. It was just incredible. And look,
Yeah.
we
And a
are
historic moment as
oh,
well. Uh,
incredibly,
yeah.
incredibly. And the outcome of that case will really be significant for our movement, right? And
Hmm.
I think we're all cautiously optimistic about the outcome. The law from Tennessee just so clearly violates equal protection. It's so clearly discrimination based on sex, and it will be, if it comes out against us, it will be a big blow, but it won't be the end of our fight, right? That's what Chase and everybody has said from the beginning. So, but it will impact our strategy, right? If it comes out
Hmm.
negatively, we'll have to continue to be creative and find new and better ways to protect trans people. And some of those are happening right now, right? There's one case I want to mention that is a case that the ACLU and Lambda Legal are working together on out of Montana. We just got an incredible ruling last week in Cross versus Montana out of the 4th Judicial District in Montana. And the reason this case is really important, and I want to mention it for your audience, is because it is a case challenging a gender affirming care ban, but it is using a state constitution, right? So it has the
Mm.
benefit of relying on state protections rather than necessarily having to pull in equal protection from the federal constitution, right? And so it's an incredibly important development in Montana, right? That Senate Bill 99, I believe, is the law, is the gender affirming care ban. It's
Oh
been
yeah.
permanently enjoined by that order last week. So trans folks in Montana, have protection under the Montana Constitution from targeted hateful laws like this, and that's important for our fight as we think about not just the states like California and New York and Illinois and Minnesota and places that we think, and Colorado, and places that we think of as very blue and very not just friendly to trans people, but protective of trans people, right? We've got
Hmm.
here. I can drop the case page here for you. Um, we've got state courts saying, no, no, laws, bills like this, targeting people's right to privacy, right to access the medication they need, that violates our state constitution. And in some cases, state constitutions go back almost as certainly as far, if not further than in some cases the federal constitution, right? And so,
Hmm.
and state law can be really powerful in protecting LGBTQ people. And so, this victory in a case brought by ACLU and Lambda Legal together is really significant. And I'll also mention there's a federal case also brought by ACLU and Lambda Legal, P Flag versus Trump, and that
Oh.
yeah, that case has stopped Trump's attempts to ban gender affirming care for young people federally. And that, that case is that there's an injunction in place, right? So that policy, or that executive order, I should say, is not going into effect. And it is in abeyance, which means the court is waiting to hold additional proceedings until the Scrimeti decision is out. So there are some
Okay,
things
because
that
they're
are that are
related.
that are hinging on the outcome in Scrimeti. So, but yeah,
That's
I mean, look, we are continuing to work incredibly hard to bring the cases that are critical for trans people, for non-binary people, for gender non-conforming people across the country. Oftentimes working collaboratively with the ACLU, sometimes bringing cases on our own. But there has just never been a time like this where it has really required all hands on deck to address so many different issues coming at us from every angle. It feels like.
It is, I mean, so, wild to me. And I can't, I mean, as a black person, we were talking earlier about like, basically black history and the attack on things like DEI and literally the attack on black
Black
history,
lives.
like,
Yeah.
and black lives. Uh, and also being trans and how these two things and being femme and a woman in my like all these things in my mind are like, oh my gosh, this is three sort of ways, multiple ways that I need to sort of like protect myself and that I'm could be vulnerable. And so it's about this intersectionality, right? And so I think about like if I were not born in this country, the fact that I was born in this country and they're question successfully questioning, like it went from absurdly questioning to now like legitimately discussing birthright citizenship,
Yeah.
like, and whether or not we should just like get rid of it.
Yeah.
Not to mention that's a slap in the face to every single black American coming off the back the tail of the 14th Amendment.
Right.
um when my people were not even considered human beings or citizens in this country, despite all the unpaid labor that they did that made so many families rich. Uh, the fact that they're like going to get rid of that, should Americans should be like very alarmed and very like paying attention to every single development with that. But in addition to that, I can't even imagine what it would be, what it would feel like to be and someone who immigrated to this country, documented or undocumented, uh, who's here right now. uh I would imagine that it would just be so scary because we're seeing so many of these images of people being hauled off to CCOT and El Salvador and other countries that they're not even from. We're seeing people that came here legally as students with and have either student visa or another type of legal status as a
Right.
residency or whatever, like different levels of uh um enfranchisement with this country,
Yes.
oftentimes paying taxes, paying
Lots of taxes. Yes.
tuition, you
Yes.
know, and being shipped out of this country to some kind of, gulag.
Gulag.
And, you know, with nothing to say, oh, it was an accident, nothing to say for it. So what is it that like I can't even imagine what it would be like to be a trans immigrant, like this person here is saying, the Alexia Elise, I'm a Mexican American trans woman to the left, uh, that left to seek asylum in Canada. So like, you know, I'm not surprised people might want to flee because it almost feels like run or get sent to El Salvador. What are your thoughts on like how this is all sort of intersecting? And do you see that the work that you do primarily in LGBTQ and HIV advocacy legally, is it rubbing up against, citizenship and immigration in your experience? Not maybe not in your own personal, but in your offices or in the practice there?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the the strength of our justice movements is that when we work together, we do so much better work. And I think that you can't, as you were saying, right? You can't like pick off pieces of your identity, right? These things are what folks are carrying with them every day. I'm thinking about the story about the gay hairstylist from Venezuela who was deported to CCOT, and there was understandably there was a lot of uproar, right, over the um, I'm blanking on his name, the guy from Massachusetts.
Garcia,
Yes,
Silmar Albrego Garcia.
thank you. But there are many other folks who are tied up in this and who are vulnerable, who are made vulnerable by incredibly violent systems, and are facing intersecting harms, right? And so I'm thinking of this guy. I'll pull up the article for you about him, but
Oh yes, please.
he uh, uh, he's I think deported while in the process of um,
Applying for asylum
I
or
I think well I can't recall
his
what
status
status
or whatever.
adjustment he was seeking, but he was deported allegedly for tattoos, right?
Oh,
For what the administration is saying demonstrate his membership in some gang, and like uh, the tattoos are in honor of his parents, right? These are, and so I think we have crossed an incredibly dangerous threshold where these incredibly complicated parts of people's lives are being made incredibly dangerously simple, right? Oh,
mm-hmm.
you have this tattoo. Oh, you were not, your parents were not born in this country, but you were, therefore out. Right? Like, it's just not that simple. And there are uh, important reasons that it is complicated, right? Because if we reduce people so simply, then this is what we end up with, right?
It
Uh,
literally says mom and dad on the damn tattoo. It's
and
like the
so
lowest bar that like
it
they don't need anything.
they really don't, and and exactly what you're saying is what is so incredibly concerning. And so yes, I think we are, I am inclined to be thinking about this through the lens of trans rights, LGBTQ, and HIV/AIDS activism and legal work. But what we're seeing here comes out of the same playbook, right? It is it is you have to blame somebody, right? That's what I was, that came from Rachel Maddow's book. They were looking for somebody to blame, and right now this is what we're seeing. We're seeing that the blame is not being laid at the feet of the people who are actually responsible for the problems in our society and in our country. The scapegoats are immigrants, right? Anyone who has expressed a viewpoint that the administration decides is terrorism. Uh, Lately, that appears to be anything about Palestine. Um,
Anything.
anybody who is trans in any kind of way in a government employment or in the military, right? These are the people who are being targeted, and the blame for all of these problems are being placed at their feet. I saw uh, Chris Mosier reposted who is the congresswoman from, oh man, why am I blanking on her name? The one who bad built.
Oh,
She's the one who.
MJT for who's also in. She's in your state.
No. The woman,
Oh,
the
Jasmine
congresswoman.
Crockett.
Yes, Jasmine Crockett asked. Someone was testifying in Congress, and Jasmine Crockett asked the witness, like, "I'm going to play a game with you, and is it trans people whose fault this is, or is it Trump?" And she just went through the list of all of the things, right? All of the issues, uh, like uh, unemployment, tariffs, creating an unnecessary tariff war, right? Like all of the issues that this administration has caused that are actually exacerbating the problems that we're experiencing. And she said, "Who did it, trans or Trump?" And the witness every single time said Trump, right? Because the reality is, it's just not the scapegoat that it's not the scapegoats that this administration is targeting. So, I think it's not a surprise to me that you know the person who's watching this said she's seeking asylum elsewhere because folks who carry multiple identities whose multiple identities are being targeted um,
Mm-hmm.
have real
Yeah.
reason to be concerned and to be seeking out safety. Right, that's what it comes down to, and
What
and
are
I think
your? Do you have any? Okay, so is there any sort of advice or best practices for people? And this could be that's like a loaded question, and there's the answer I already know is yes. But what are like some of the quick, not quick, but like immediate uh, ways that people can or should conduct themselves, or things to keep in mind in the coming months, weeks, feels like seconds,
yeah.
if they do carry multiple identities that are being targeted by this authoritarian administration, by the authoritarian behavior of the administration, I should be more specific.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think so. I'm thinking back to back in January when the executive order came out, and there was that really clear language about passports and trans people, broadly defined, gender nonconforming, non-binary, separately also intersex people, folks in this community, right, or separately intersex people who may not identify as trans, uh, were really experiencing an understandable amount of fear, anxiety, and in some cases just terror, right? About what was happening at passport offices across the country. There was a period of 2 weeks where we were just in this very awful limbo where no applications were being processed and we didn't know what was happening. Now we know what's happening. A terrible policy is being deployed. But I talked to, and I know people at other organizations did too. So I'm not saying I talked to every trans person across the country, but I talked to a lot of people at all hours of the day and night, people who were
Reaching out.
reaching out and trying to wrap their head around and doing
What to
some
do?
disaster planning. I'll call it disaster planning, right?
Yeah.
Doing some worst case scenarioing. What do I do? And the thing I go back to is this, right? Uh, and you talked about this actually at the beginning of our conversation. We will get through this with each other, right? So creating structures of mutual aid, building to the extent you don't have it, but really shoring up the people in your inner circle, right? Communicating with them, letting them know where you are at all times when you're traveling, when you are going places where you think you might encounter some kind of state or federal agent, having people who know where you are, right? That seems to be sadly a pretty important threshold question, right? Like if you're going for and this is not legal advice, I should say this is not legal advice. I'm not giving legal advice, but this is sort of my like trans person with a legal education thinking about what it's like to be a trans person in this moment, and in particular a trans person
Mm-hmm.
with multiply marginalized identities, right?
Mm-hmm.
Building structures of communication, building emergency contact lists, right? Like knowing a couple of phone numbers without having to look at your phone. That's been the hardest one for me. I
Oh
used
my
to, I
gosh.
had 17 phone numbers memorized 20 years ago, and now I can barely remember two. It's like, how did we survive without cell phones? But seriously, memorize some phone numbers, right? Start building communication practices, right? Get in the habit of checking in with people via text or a phone call when you're going to a place where you're not sure what it's going to be like or who might be there, right? Over communication in this moment is not a
Yeah.
bad thing. It's just not a bad thing.
Yeah.
And so thinking about how, like, a security professional put it to me like this: get in the habit of doing these things so that when you're in the moment of panic and your adrenaline is
You do
surging
them
and you
anyway.
can't
Second
think
nature.
straight, you just do it, right? And that was so
Mhm.
helpful for me personally to think about, right? And so building some of these good safety communication habits now so that you have them when you need them and so that they're just automatic. You just automatically do it, right? And then so that's the like on the ground suggestions, right?
Okay.
And not
I'm
not
taking
really
note of these things and we'll
yes.
post them, folks.
But then kind of zooming out, people need to be thinking in the ways that you were just talking about thinking, Peppermint, like thinking about what is the line for you.
Hmm.
Don't wait, right? Don't wait to think about these things and just sort of put it off and say, oh, I just saw a cartoon from the New Yorker, right, with these people running from laser beams shooting down at them, and the woman is saying to, or the one person is saying to the other person, I don't really mind the government's new targeted laser device because it hasn't hit me yet. Don't wait. Don't wait for the laser to hit you,
To
right? The
hit you.
point is,
Yes. They
start
have
thinking.
one.
I right start thinking now about what is going to be for you the line. And look, that doesn't have to be the line that you like decide to move across the Atlantic, because I think for a lot of people, right, they're thinking about it like, oh god, I can't move to Europe, like I can't
Yeah.
move to South America, I don't have the money, that's really scary for me, my whole life is here.
Hmm.
But here's how I've been thinking about it. Here's how a friend who's a security professional encouraged me to think about it. What's the next safest thing you could do? What's the next safest thing you could do, right? So I'm thinking, okay, let's say things get really bad in Georgia. I can
Hmm.
go to Maryland, right?
I love that.
I
I
can go
love
to
that you did
Maryland,
that. Hmm.
right? So I'm thinking about like, what's the next safest thing I can do? Don't think like, I think when we start to think about like planning, gaming these things out, right? Making a plan. If you make your plan too unreachable, you'll stop planning. You'll just go, oh no, no, this is too stressful. I can't think about this. So don't do that, right? Think about what the next possible thing for you is. So maybe it's even smaller than that, right? Like I'm thinking of a
Hmm.
state, but maybe for someone it's like, I can't get out of the state. What's a friendly, safe city I can go to? What's a city I know I can find other trans people in? What's a city I know I can get resources in? Right? Like I think we have to bring it down for people. Not. I'm not saying dumb it down. I'm saying make it accessible. Make
Hmm.
safety planning accessible for people who are not going to be able to jump on an international flight tomorrow. Right? That's just not feasible for all of us. So I think that's a great place to start. Right?
These are some great tips. So fortify a diverse personal circle for mutual aid. Memorize phone numbers and contact info of the people in your personal circle. Start regular, like routine communications with these
Routine.
people.
Yep.
Moving, if you're going to move, if you need to move, consider moving to the next, whatever the next safest level of protection would be, and maybe have multiple levels of, if it's not so bad, then maybe I'll do this, but if it gets wild, I'll go here. And then if I need to move out of the country, that's the last resort kind of a
Yep.
thing.
Yep.
And did I miss one?
Those were great notes. I don't think so. I don't think so. You got it. I think
I
yeah.
was typing. I was a typing.
Yeah, you were doing it.
Uh,
No, that's
we're gonna
that,
put these on the screen
yeah.
for the folks so you can see them here, and I might share this separately as a, like
Sure.
a tweet, um, and Listen, Carl Charles, I know you have to get back to the office, and we are a little bit over time, and I'm really grateful for your work. I'm grateful for your candor, and even hearing bad news from you doesn't feel so bad.
That's a compliment you could have given me. Wow, thank you.
And I'm really happy for the partnership and the coalition that you and Lambda Legal have with other legal advocacy organizations like ACLU and
Yes,
whomever else you all might be working together with. I think that sort of really gives me sort of hope for wanting to partner with different groups of people. um like when you talked about building the social circle that we have, our personal social circle. Obviously, it's going to have my friends and my girlfriends, but
yeah, yeah,
maybe like that doctor or that like carpenter that I know from next door. It's not a bad idea to like start to get to know who they are, and if it feels like somebody that's safe to build a relationship with,
yep,
or at least keep their number and offer my number.
yep,
That we could, listen. They just burnt down our house. You build the house, I'll cook the food. Well, I ain't cooking the
yeah.
food, but I'll figure out a job to do. And, kind of go at it that way, and,
Yeah,
utilizing and building connections with people in our communities, even if they're not in our close friend circle. That's
yes,
what I think is a good idea. That's
that's great.
literally the definition of mutual aid, basically.
That's great.
And so yeah, I think that's a good place to start. Thank you so much for this list. And a couple things to celebrate are the recent decisions, like the decision in the Orv Trump case. In some of these cases that you mentioned earlier, there is great news, and over nearly 900 bills, and so many of them struck down
Yeah,
or
not passed.
thwarted.
Yeah, yeah,
Not only this year but also last year, which we could use as a sort of sort of the tea leaves about this year, hopefully.
hopefully.
uh and I'm just grateful for the work that you do. So I hope that you can get the
Likewise.
rest. Where would you like people to follow you to keep up with some of the things that you're doing, if at all?
Oh gosh. I am trying to be on Blue Sky. I was an avid Twitterer and I have
I
not
know
gotten
you
my
used to go. We used to like hang out at the
I
little cocktail
know,
parties and things, and then I would see you
man.
on Twitter. I was like, "Oh, Carl is going in on
I
Twitter. You were a
Twitter was the
fighter
jam. I
on
miss it.
Twitter."
I know. I miss it. So I'm trying to be on Blue Sky, but I'm really not there too much anymore.
Okay.
But folks can follow lambdalegal.org. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, TikTok, all the things. And that's where you can find me talking about work stuff. And I'm just so glad that we got to share this time together. This was, I know I was talking a lot of work stuff, but things felt not so bad being here with you the last hour. So thank you.
Aw.
Yeah.
You are amazing. Thank you so much, everyone. This is Carl Charles of Lambda Legal. If you are able to, in any way, shape, or form, educate yourself on the different advocacy organizations that are doing this type of work, especially in with regards to freedom of speech and as and things that relate to citizenship, because those are two things that we need to be very firm and strong in our country if it's going to still be the country that we thought it was when we were growing up. um and so make sure you follow all the work that Carl and the other fabulous attorneys at Lambda Legal are doing. And if you're in a position to post about them, share about them, learn more about them, and then even financially support them if you can, because like there are so many or I'm just thinking of the attacks on law firms that the current
We need to,
administration
yeah,
is levying,
yeah,
basically, severely limiting and sort of hobbling the abilities of many law firms and also nonprofits that are doing the work that fights, like, that resists the efforts of this administration.
yeah.
And so please support if you can Lambda Legal and all of their efforts. And yeah, with that, thank you so much, Carl Charles. I'll see you on the flip side.
That's right.
Everyone, if you're watching this, please don't forget to just share this stream, clip it. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. If you're watching on Instagram, go on over and follow me on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, follow me on Twitch. If you're watching on Twitch, follow me on Instagram. Hit me up everywhere because you never know when I might disappear. This might be the last time you ever see me, y'all. So thank you so much to those who watched, and we will see you on the other side. Bye, everybody. Yeah.